Hey everybody, welcome to another hour show. Tonight is Joe Panico's night, talking about so on a Wednesday night at 10 o'clock Eastern time, and then we go for as long as at least an hour, and if we go over, that's extra bonus knowledge for you. So Joe, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody that doesn't do not know you? Does not know you from the after show hangouts and all that good fun stuff.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Joe Panico. I own a couple of businesses, Power PC Systems and Surplus Wholesale Supply. Power PC Systems is actually a computer business. It's a product sales and service business. And then the Surplus Wholesale Supply is basically an eBay store, and I sell my PCs on there as well, along with other platforms. And it's been an interesting probably year or so since I started this. It was actually back in 2014 when I started my business. As far as PCs go, I originally hailed from Chicago, Illinois. I was a municipal employee down there, and I worked for Rosemont as well as a police officer, and always wanted to live up out of the area, and had my family raised up in a good college town and that sort of thing. And my goal was to be in business by the time I was 30 years old. And I actually achieved that goal. I was able to get into contracting, which was my first love and passion for a lot of years. And then going from there, as years went on, I started to have a few health problems and things like that, because I beat myself up pretty good, like a lot of contractors do. And by accident, purely started my computer business, and then decided it was time to maybe look into the eBay store again. And that came about from actually having a back surgery as a result of my previous businesses. And during that time, I started looking into YouTube videos and looking into people like Chris and others that were doing this, and trying to kind of learn the ropes again, because I had been away from it so long. And I got so motivated by it, I gave myself a goal that after the first of the year I was going to start my store back up. And it's been actually doing pretty well for what I've been able to do here. And the PC part of it, I'll talk a little bit about that, and then some of the other stuff I sell as we go through the evening tonight. But let's start out with the PC part of it. Typically what I do is I try to locate certain types of PCs and PC parts. Again, starting out with building computers brand new, it was kind of my first passion. But then I realized, especially when Windows XP was going to be terminated, that there was a demand. People were just kind of panicking and looking to either change PCs or update or that sort of thing. And I had the opportunity to purchase quite a few of them. I still have probably more than 50 of them sitting here. And it's been an interesting road. The decision now has been, as time has evolved, do I sell the systems whole, or do I part them out? The marketplace has actually gotten a bit flooded. There was always really a demand for PCs, both new and old alike. The gaming industry, when you hear people talk about how computer desktops are going to go away, I vehemently disagree with that. There are so many case manufacturers alone, not mentioning power supply and RAMs and motherboards and all the other components that go into a PC. That's why, depending on what you want your niche to be in this, if you're interested in that sort of thing, used parts, even for older systems, can bring some really nice money. The reality of it is, if you have a system that you see is going for $50, $60, let's say, which that's not an uncommon price for something that might be 6, 7, 8 years old, you would think that people wouldn't be interested in something that old. But you get these old Dell Optiplexes, they're workhorses. They run like nobody's business. It's like trying to, put an old Studebaker away and say it's never going to be worth anything again. You find out those are still the best built machines around in some ways. That's maybe not the best analogy, but these systems, there's those, I use that as an example because that's a pretty high demand system out there still, even for older PCs. And their parts, if you have a $60 PC, you could probably pull more than that if you were willing to part them out. Power supplies still can pull $35. RAM, I have an old Dell Dimension as an example. I was trying to find RAM for it. It's 512 megs. It's in there right now. I wanted to put a couple of gigs in there, and I seen them $35 a stick, which was driving me crazy because I thought, holy cow, that seemed a little bit on the far-fetched side for something so old. But there are certain systems that kind of demand certain money because of their uses and the way they were made. And that's another thing too I wanted to kind of point out. No matter what you do for a computer, they are specific to your needs. That's how anybody should purchase a computer, whether it's new, old, whatever. You have to look at what your needs are and what your desires are for having a system in your house. I'll give you a perfect example too. I feel like I'm rambling a little here, but I'm trying to get a lot of thoughts out at once initially. I have a home entertainment PC that I put together. It's a little Optiplex 755. They call it SF, which is small form factor. I put a solid state drive in that. I put a updated video card for HDMI. I hooked it up to, we had it on the 46-inch screen. Now it's back on a 40-inch TV. And I run that with a keyless, or keyboard, excuse me, a wireless keyboard, and it's got a touchpad mouse right in it, and I could do that right from my lap and sit in my comfort of my chair and just really enjoy it. And coincidentally, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight, is I'm kind of I've actually become a big Linux fanboy because there's this big Windows, Mac, Linux thing that goes on in the world today. And if you do follow PCs, you'll find out that that's a huge thing coming up right now. Most people don't realize, I'll talk about that briefly too, Linux actually is an operating system that's been around forever. And it runs newer vehicles. It runs these high-tech refrigerators. You listen to it on a radio station. I mean, it's in more things than you know. And it's just now really coming about for the desktop world. And the nice thing about Linux is when it comes to older hardware, it's one of the nice operating systems. There's so many different versions or distributions, they call it, that will allow you to basically revive an old PC. So if you have an interest in maintaining a PC rather than selling it, that's one way of doing it. Or if you want to sell it, I'm not reading the chat here. I keep getting Brian. I see that there is a Linux language, which that's to some extent that's true. When you get talking about that, it is almost like a language of its own. Anyway, sorry if I'm getting a little bit too run on here, but Chris, did you have something that you wanted to maybe kind of interject or ask before we keep going on here a little further?
Like I told you before the show, I have 20 questions. And
okay.
For everybody that's wondering, we are having Google problems because both Joe and I tried putting our names underneath our pictures like we normally do, and it wasn't working. And Joe, you didn't realize this, but while you were talking, for whatever reason, I was watching, I saw I'm live with you. It was showing me that you were like a couple of seconds behind your voice on the video.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. It's like ever since we went live, there's a bit of a lag, and I'm not quite sure why.
So I don't know if Google's doing another YouTube change or something that's messing up with it tonight. But
yeah.
Well, one of my questions that I'm sure everybody's wondering is, are there any? Well, you already talked about Mac and the Linux, but are there any particular brands that for computers that people should look out for?
Well, if you're not doing something that's specifically or custom built for yourself, and you're looking to buy something pre-built, I've always been kind of a fan of Dell. Now, Dell has certainly over time changed quite a bit from what they used to be. If you're into the Mac world like Neil is, you're going to always be Apple, and Apple does have its place. And coincidentally, Apple or Mac platform, the operating system is built off the Unix platform, which is Linux. So, and that's why there's so many similarities to it. If you look at the operating systems, they almost look the same in many ways. So, and they're very stable running. But from somebody on the PC side, I have really had good reliability overall from Dell. They do have their inexpensive line. The one thing I've always recommended to people when they're buying a PC is to look at the service. The disadvantage that most people don't realize when they buy a PC, which off the shelf big box like Best Buy or one of those stores, Walmart, etc., they're loaded with bloatware, which is one of the things that eventually can be actually rapidly will slow your system down. And it's all this advertising that these vendors put in. That's how they're able to bring the prices down. It's basically co-opt marketing. And they don't have the support the same way. They have mail-in support, which if you think about it, if you spend, let's say, $300 for a computer, and now you have to spend the postage to mail it in, because that's the type of service you have, and you get it back, and if the problem's still not resolved and you're sending it back, what have you saved? So I've always recommended to people, if you're going to get something, buy it directly from their website, like Dell itself or Toshiba or wherever you want to go, and make sure it has on-site support. Do you need extended warranties? I don't think so. I don't think they're worth the money, and that's what the big boxes do, is they try to sell you on the extended warranties. I know this is a little off topic, yet still on topic, because it's not just about reselling parts. It's also about when you're purchasing computers, and I'd like to inform people about that. The big box stores, when they're selling these aftermarket warranties, they're not the same as when you're getting something from the manufacturer. They use a third-party servicer, which the manufacturers also do it, but they have to be certified. That's the difference. I'm trying to read a question here. I see, hope you can answer. I have a Dell desktop that sound works sometimes and sometimes doesn't. Any suggestions, any expertise on what's going on? Coco, did you update it to Windows 10 by chance too? Because some of the things that are happening, and if not, it still may be the same issue. It could very well be a driver issue. Let's see. I've tried different speakers. Yeah, I would certainly wonder if it isn't a driver issue. There's ways of troubleshooting that, and believe it or not, Linux is actually a good way to troubleshoot a machine too. Because if you load it on a USB, and there's plenty of YouTube videos out there to show how to do this, if you plug that in and boot into that, and your speakers work, then you know it's not a hardware issue. Then it's more than likely something in your operating system software. One of the other things is you can go into your control panel and go into the systems or device manager, and then see if there's almost like a triangle, like a warning sign. If you see any of that, that tells you something's not acting right. So let's see.
I saw another question from Brian.
Okay.
And this might help other people, because even though it's not necessarily related to computer parts, but he's asking how many variants of Linux is there exactly?
Oh God, and Brian knows the answer to that. Actually, there's quite a few. Typically, the ones that most people like to use. I mean, Ubuntu is actually one of the favorites that people tend to know about, because it's pretty common, and there's a lot of distributions built off of that. Debian's another one, KDE, XFCE. I mean, there's a list of them. And what it boils down to is trying ones that kind of float your boat and the flavor that you like. If you want something that's more Windows-esque type looking, Mint is like one of the most popular ones, and I like a version of Mint, which they have several. They have one, a lot of people say Mate or Mate, XFCE. I like the KDE version. It's a more of a business kind of geared toward operating system, and it's got a lot of added features in there that you typically don't find in most other operating systems. The beauty of it also is the operating system is free, and if you get bored with it, you can change it out. As long as you have your files backed up and saved, it's real simple to reload. It takes like anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes depending on the distribution you're putting in. It's that sort of thing. It's just computers actually are not really that challenging. Typically, when you have something break, which is why a lot of people decide, oh, I'm going to update or I'm going to sell or that kind of thing. You know, they're just not aware of how to troubleshoot them. And that's why I say, as much as I keep sounding like I'm going to beat the Linux horse to death, there's a lot of advantages to it. If you don't ever want to use it as a primary system, you could run it right off the USB and just try it and play with it and never load it on your computer. But it's an awesome way to test your computer, especially if you're not sure if it's hardware or software related. Windows 10, I think overall is a decent operating system for what it is. But what the telemetry and the privacy issues and the things like that are the things I really have issue with. And also, you know, and Linux can have this happen too, and I think Neil can attest to this, so can Mac. When they do updates, sometimes they break things. It's just how fast can it get fixed? And in the Linux world, there's so many people working on it, it usually gets fixed almost instantaneously. So there's a lot of advantages to that. Now, if you do have a system that you're just deciding, hey, it's time to sell, where do I sell it? I use a variety of platforms. Okay, obviously my eBay store is one. I've done really well on Craigslist, although on Craigslist, one of the key things I do is I put in there, because of Nigerian scams and that kind of thing, because most people know, we've all seen those. I put in there, for the safety of both parties, you know, please leave a name, a legitimate name, telephone number, and email. And the telephone number I put in parentheses, most recognizable, because if I see an area code I recognize, then I know they're somewhat legit and I'll respond to them. And it's done very well for me. Neil actually kind of was talking about Mercari, and you should try Mercari. You should try Mercari. He said it works really well for clothes. He's been doing really well with it. Well, guess what? I tried that within the last couple, 3 weeks or a month at most, and I just sold a computer yesterday on there. The nice thing about that is there's no fees. OfferUp is another avenue. These OfferUp and Mercari are both apps that you can use to sell these products on. The one thing that, and you've preached this, Chris, and so is probably every other YouTuber out there that talks about reselling, is do your homework. Let's see. I see there's a question in there from Jim Bennett. If we were to resell computer parts, what would be safe to resell, and what would you say to stay away from? You know, Jim, there's not a ton of parts that aren't resellable. If there was anything that would have any kind of quote unquote toxin issues or things like that, which today's world, that's not as much the case anymore. I mean, you could sell just about anything on there. It boils down to how far do you want to take it when you're selling things. There are people that will literally scrap a computer right out for the precious metals. Most people don't realize that the RAM has 24 karat or 18 karat gold in some, but up to 24 karat gold on it. You have aluminum cooling blocks on them. I mean, you get enough of this scrap together, you can make some money off it, scrapping it that way, but then you also have to have the room to store this stuff. So power supplies tend to do real well. RAM does do real well. Motherboards can be a hit or miss. It depends. That's a little more specific need for people. CPUs themselves will sell really well. I don't know if you'd want me to try a screen share here, Chris, or not, but well, I don't know if I dare chance it because of Google issues tonight, but I'll give you an example. I sold some, they're called the coolers and fans that came off of actually i7 processors. Pentium, i7, i3, i5, all the Intel processors tend to use the same kind of almost generic fit cooler and cooling fans. It's the stock ones, they call them. And those tend to be throwaway items because most people, especially who are into building computers, will throw that away, put an aftermarket cooler in there, and they throw those away. How I got these is I happened to find a Craigslist ad for somebody who was selling a bulk amount of computer parts. I didn't know what was in it at the time or anything, and I drove over there to take a look at it. And I gave them, it was $200, I'll never forget, it was $250 for the parts. In that included a server case, and as far as a rack server case, and then another one was an actual tower case. At the time, now granted, computer parts going down in value a little bit, and some of them do still hold value. This case at the time when I got it was probably a little over $100 and something. Now it's down to about $79.89 for that case, even though it's brand new. The server rack alone is probably $100, give or take, depending on the need for it. It's a specific need type of item. These fans, I just sold 3 of them at $9 a piece with $3 and some change shipping. I have taken parts and put them from that batch and put them in the computers that I've resold. I've sold more other parts from this. I've made my money back already, and I still have a whole wealth of stuff down there yet. There's cables and cards and things like that. I see a question from Brian. It says Intel or AMD. Right now, Intel still has kind of the edge over AMD because AMD's had a challenge with some of their components. AMD has always been more looked at as the budget line of parts because it gives you a decent part for the money, but there was a little bit of performance loss there when you're doing that. You don't. But now, in today's world, even as of recent, AMD is coming out with some new products that are really going to chase Intel and give them a run for their money. So they're making a good climb here. AMD's been a company that's been kind of in trouble for a while financially, but they're hanging in there and they're coming up with some good things. I don't like that they've dropped support for some of their video drivers, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. But if you're looking to get something, let's say you're looking for a new computer and you're looking to buy parts, there's a site called PCPartPicker.com. That is a nice site for it researches most of the vendors out there on what the current prices are going for. Now, one of the things I'll tell you to remember when you're searching parts is to don't just look at the price, because some of these may or may not include shipping. Some of them include rebates. It depends on availability, things like that. So kind of look at each one that interests you. A lot of people know Newegg and Amazon, of course, and sites like that, Micro Center. Those things, those sites are good places to look. I use Newegg actually a lot to verify specs on parts and things like that. And I do buy a lot from them, but I probably sometimes buy more from Amazon at the time because they're more competitive. But again, not always. Another thing you have to take into account, like I have an Amazon distribution center here, so I'm paying tax, so I weigh out, is that tax going to put me over the difference in the cost of something, and am I willing to wait a couple more days to get it? So that kind of thing. But it's like anything else. If you do a little bit of research, I'm always here for anybody to reach out to if they have questions about stuff. I know I've helped a couple of resellers already who have had computer issues for their daily business, and worked with them either via messaging or over the phone just to kind of give them some help and walk them through their problems. And it's not something that I've charged anybody for. I just do it because, like you guys are doing, I'm out to help them and try to be of service with my expertise in that area. The other thing that you got to remember too, again, with computers is if you don't look at the systems. Let me back up a second. Getting back one more time on the processors, like everybody knows the Intel i3, i5, i7. You don't have to be a computer geek to know that. Everybody's heard of it. What a lot of people don't realize is that there are different levels. You may have 5 or 7 different variations of that processor. And the performance levels, there's a couple other sites I use, but you guys will never remember them all if I start rattling them off. But there's other sites that I use that will actually tell you the performance differences of a processor. And that's where you can compare AMD and Intel side by side. And I know some of this is getting really technical, and I'm sorry if I'm throwing it off for anybody here that may or may not understand the lingo. But this is the key, because the average layperson walking in and say, oh, I see i3, so that must be a pretty fast processor. That's not always true. And sometimes there could be a better performing AMD processor in it or whatever. So if you really want to know, if you want something that you're saying, oh, my computer seems slow and I'd like to have something that's really fast, don't just go by that number. You have to look at the output of them. Like there's a Pentium 3220 that I just put in the machine here, and there's a 3250. Very little difference between the two, but those Pentiums will keep up with some of those i3s or even surpass them too. So there's a lot more to this than you realize. Now, from a reselling standpoint, where that information is important is the people buying it usually know what they're looking for. That's where that information is critical. Same thing with a power supply. You could put two power supplies side by side. One's in this little silver case and the other one's in this nice painted black case. And you go, well, what's the difference? One's silver, one's black. More than likely, the ones that are painted black are put out. I'll give you some examples. If you have a Corsair. Corsair has they call them 80 plus bronze, gold, platinum. They're more efficient. They're actually very competitive in price. They're a better performing power supply. They're less dangerous because if a power supply goes, it could take out your whole computer. And then you could have I'm trying to think of a generic brand like Bell Arc or something like that. When you buy these everyday computers off the shelf, they usually have a cheap power supply in them. They may say 350 or 450 or 500 watts, and everybody thinks, oh, wow, that's a good supply. One way to tell a good power supply, especially if you're doing it from a reseller standpoint, physically holding them. If one has a lot of weight to it, it sounds cheesy, but a heavy power supply usually means a better power supply. It's made with better parts, and it's heavier parts, and it's something that's going to last longer. There's also a difference between having modular, semi-modular, and non-modular power supplies. The non-modular are the ones where you see like the braided cables. The cheaper ones are going to have what looks like just the individual wires. Modular look like almost cable strips, and the nice thing about those is you only use what you need, and the rest of them you store away in a box. So, hey Chad, how are you? Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be up and about. Anyway, so if you're going to sell computer parts, there is a little bit of a science to it. You don't have to be a genius by any means. If you're just selling a simple laptop because you want to upgrade or something like that, just look up your specs, search it on, online, eBay as an example for the solds or whatever, and try and get an idea of what maybe they're going for. And that'll give you a reference point on what you could potentially get for it. Laptops typically aren't that expensive to ship. You can probably ship them almost anywhere in the country for 10 to 15 bucks. If you're looking at desktops, they're a little bit trickier to ship. That's why I usually those will do better locally on a local platform like Craigslist or Mercari or something like that. But it's just that's where having the particulars on it's always helpful because most people that are looking for that stuff will research that out. Now, that being said, you could have somebody that needs just a basic computer for a kid, whether they're going to school or they just want to keep them off their computer or whatever. That information that might not be as critical. But when you're looking to sell parts specifically online on eBay, or even if you're using Amazon or whatever, platforms such as that, it's probably more critical to have that information. Because, like I said, people that are looking for those specific needs are going to want those specific parts. Another thing to do, too, is if you have accumulation of parts and you don't want to just give it away and want to try to get some money on it, put it together in a lot. Do a bulk sale. Make sure you take really good pictures and you detail as much information as possible and just kind of clean house that way. I mean, that's a pretty good way to dispose of them, So the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight is I don't sell just computer stuff. I do sell a variety of things. And I'm actually starting with a lot of my own personal household stuff that I've accumulated over the years. I've got so much, and some of it from my past businesses. I mentioned I was a contractor at one time, and I used to have a medical equipment supply business, which I still do sell some of that stuff because it fits with what I do now with my online store. And I used to sell grab bars, ramps, all kinds of different equipment. And there's one particular item that I sold recently, and I know Chris had presented a question to me earlier tonight. Did you want to mention that question, Chris?
Well, I was just asked what was the most expensive item you've sold in in your past. So, and we all
Okay.
know, most people that know in the hangouts after the show know what you've sold. So, for the people that don't hang out,
From eBay standpoint, the most expensive so far, thus far, was a piece of equipment that was designed for somebody who is either quadriplegic or paraplegic. It's an exercise piece of equipment. They call it an easy stand or glider. What it is the person who needs it transfers into the seat. They strap themselves in. This machine has to be kind of fitted for that person. And then there's a handle that they can crank themselves into a standing position. And then there's actually handles where they can work back and forth that will work their legs. Because even when if you're quote unquote a quadriplegic, doesn't mean that all four parts aren't working, your legs and your arms, you know. The gentleman that bought it from me, which we're still trying to make arrangements to get it shipped down to him, is paralyzed from the waist down. That item, brand new, I helped arrange that purchase for the person I got it from. At that time was $6,600 for that item. She wanted to get rid of that and one other item that was at the time retailed for about $1,000. And I wasn't prepared to be buying expensive equipment just to have it sitting around. And she just wanted to get out of it, get it out of the house. She goes, I just need a quick couple $100. And I felt really bad about taking it. She goes, she knew me as a friend. She said, just take it. So I gave her $200 for these items. I just sold the Easy Stander for $3,200. And I still have the other piece of equipment yet to sell too. I look at it as it was kind of a lost sale that I didn't get. They picked another vendor, even though I helped her get it. I was glad to help her get it, but I was a little upset I didn't get the sale. But, you know, I used it for a home show display item every time I used to do a home show booth with my accessibility equipment. The most expensive thing, though, in my history of selling just product was years ago. I had an independent website, which is another platform you can sell product on. And I never had an e-commerce through that, purposely because I wanted people to call me so I knew they were getting the right piece of equipment for their needs. And I literally only had 2 returns in the entire time I had that website. And one was because somebody changed their mind, and one was because they changed the color. It was a powder coat. And I figured I'll take them back because either I can resell them or I'll donate them. And I did. But I sold a ramp out to a contractor out in New York City. They said it was cheaper to do that, and they were able to reuse it. It was an aluminum ramp system, and it was, I think, $13,000 if I remember right back then. And they were using it when they were working at a train station. I remember that very well. Grab bars wise, I used to sell all kinds of grab bars. One of the things that set me apart was the word custom. I had an architect who wanted some chrome polished grab bars. And she gave me all the dimensions. I did a drawing. I had her sign off on the drawing. There were 3 grab bars. There were over $1,300 for these grab bars. And she made a mistake by an inch. And I told her, I said, send it back to me. We can have it cut and seamed, and you'd never know it. They said it would be $25 to do the cut and seam and just a shipping cost. She goes, no, I want another bar because I'll know it's there. So she spent another $350 for a grab bar, a single grab bar. So medical equipment is another thing that can be very lucrative in the right application. I do see, and I apologize, I'm just going to call you Dak for sure because I'm trying to read the crazy card. Okay, where do you sell your medical equipment? So I actually do sell some of it now on eBay, but I did primarily sell most of it through my website. And I also, because I was a contractor and it kind of segued into that business, I used to do a lot of work for government agencies, hospitals, private agencies that did assisted living, that kind of thing. And that's another avenue. A lot of people think just doing online sales, but depending on how you want to, model your business, you can do direct sales to agencies or different organizations that need this. I used to contact or attend senior centers. I used to do little presentations to people. I used to do home shows. There's all kinds of ways of presenting yourself. It just depends on what your business model is. If you're talking straight up reselling, then Amazon or eBay or even like I mentioned, the other platforms, the app platform, Mercari, OfferUp, all of them, website, all of those can work. Now, if you're looking at just a standard, 12, 24, 16, 18, on up to whatever the lengths are in straight grab bars, you're going to have some competition. what set me apart again was, like I said, the custom or the unique bars were, you know, the wall to floor or the sitz bath type bars, or different. There's a whole realm of them. They're all different configurations, and the ability to have them modified to somebody's needs is what will help you sell those things as an advantage over, let's say, somebody else is reselling. One of the things I did find out in my career with that, which I was almost a little disappointed. There's a vendor I used to use in town here who is no longer here after 105 years of being a business. It was a plumbing supply house. So I used to buy, in a pinch, I'd buy my straight bars from them instead of using my across the country vendors. And come to find out, the bars they were selling, which is a very popular brand, it's an American name brand, but they were imported from China. And how I kind of put two and two together was, if I wanted to buy them at a heavily discounted price from them, I had to buy a minimum of 3,000 bars. Well, guess what? When I started looking into the Chinese suppliers, just out of curiosity, because I always vowed to have these bars made American made here and sold American products, they wanted 3,000 units, you know, as a sale. So I kind of put two and two together where those bars are coming from. And coincidentally, when I go to those in a pinch, I would have a problem with the flanges lining up a little bit on them. And that could cause a problem for somebody who's screwing, you know, a grab bar into the wall, and you're putting some pressure on those, and you can crack some of your tiles, you know. So that's something else to be aware of too when you're selling products like that. Again, I see Chad still in the house. I mean, you have Chad and Chris, you know, you've said the same thing. And again, any other YouTuber that's in resale, the main key and the mantra in your business should be research. You know, you need to know what your product is, not only its cost base, but also how well it's going to perform. And those are also things that will keep you from having those returns or dissatisfied customers. And the other thing too is, if you're getting into medical equipment business, I see. I'm laughing. I apologize because I sent some hot sauce down to Dusty, and he was just choking on the stuff, I'm sure. Actually, one of them was ghost pepper sauce. Anyway, there's a safety factor there. You know, when people are using medical equipment type products, there is a liability factor there. So it's very important that you know what you're dealing with. You know, everybody thinks a grab bar is harmless, but if it's not, honestly, if it's not installed right, even though it left your hands and you sold it, believe me, if they're contacting an attorney, they're going to sue anybody that had their hands on it down the road. So much like any business, you should still carry a certain level of liability coverage, that kind of thing. And if you're dealing in certain type of products like that, you definitely want to have the coverage for something like that. I actually have been parting out some of my vintage camera equipment. I wanted to sell it as a package because everything was in really nice shape. But when I started looking at what that equipment was selling for, I couldn't justify it. I mean, it was $50-something for the whole kit. I've already sold 2 parts and still have a bunch of it left, and I've made more than that already on it. And you know, there's quite a few of the resellers in here that part things out too. So you know, and it happened to be the brand name was Nikon. But anyway, I'm kind of looking at my notes here. One of the things I wanted to touch on too, a little bit briefly, was drop shipping. I know with eBay and Amazon frowns on it and things like that with drop shipping, you know, they say that's a bad way to go. How I used to drop ship was when somebody would order something from me, they'd come across my website and they'd call me and they'd want to order something. I would give them the lead times. I'd get their information. They'd have to prepay, and I would have my vendor either send them out if they were a stock item or make it up and send it to them. So drop shipping can actually be a good thing if it's done in the right application. Now, there's a difference between the drop shipping an item and private labeling. Private labeling is when you're specifically branding an item with your name on it. And drop shipping is when you're selling something under your name, and your vendor may not, you know, they may keep it hidden where it's coming from or that kind of thing. It's not really private labeling, but it's drop shipping under your name. And truthfully, I think with eBay, you could probably get away with that. It's a little more forgiving. As long as you have an established relationship with a vendor you can trust that you know is not going to let you down on supplying product. Because, I mean, you see all these products coming from China all the time that have these long spanned delivery dates. And if somebody's not in a hurry for something, that's probably another avenue you can actually do that with. So, you know, I would definitely consider that as something else to keep in mind. You know, I do have multiple businesses myself, and then my wife is a realtor, which is technically another business, and we manage that very differently sometimes than I've heard a lot of other resellers do with some of the online accounting. I use QuickBooks like a lot of people do. A way to keep that straight, and I'm segueing into this for a reason, because it's still all tied back to reselling or whatever your business is. One way to keep it straight, instead of having a bunch of different programs under there, is I do what they call class tracking, and then, you know, it all ties in with my marketing and that sort of thing. You know, another thing too that works well, which a lot of people don't realize, if they have products that they just simply can't get rid of, or they're struggling to get rid of it and they just want it out of their site, you know, depending on your situation, write-offs don't always benefit you, but in most cases, people who have a well-established business, it helps. If you donate something, you know, and I'm not saying donate necessarily to Goodwill. I donate computers all the time to kids or families that don't have the means of buying one, you know, and I'll donate to them, and I'll take a write-off. That's another way of kind of cleaning out your surplus inventory and yet taking some kind of tax advantage. It's like getting cash in a different form, even though you don't have the cash for it, you know, so there are benefits to it. Now that I've gotten so long-winded and I've kind of rambled through a bunch of stuff, Chris, do you have any other questions? Does anybody else have questions in the audience here that they'd like to ask?
Well, I have a few questions, but like I said, let you get your stuff, and you worry about the hour. We're 15 minutes now.
Okay, I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions out there. I didn't hear you. Did you ask a question, Chris? I apologize.
Yeah, what I said was that I have quite a few.
Okay.
And but you were worried about us not being able to get to the hour. We only got 15 minutes before the hour's up.
Yeah. Well, you could ask. I mean, if you want to ask some of them, we can go down that list a little bit too, if there's something we haven't covered.
Okay. Well, one of the questions I asked you earlier. What do you think of doing videos on computer selling, or use on your YouTube channel? So, since you have two different, you have your personal and you have your supply wholesale video channel.
Yeah, I think in the right application, I would. I'm thinking about it, but I, as you know, we've talked about this before in private hangouts. Right now, my biggest struggle is space, and I'm looking into getting a space outside of my home. Part of it is just to get away from it, because you never get away from your work then if it's always in your home. It's been in here for years, but if I can get things organized and planned like I'd like, I think I would like to do eventually some videos. I don't know if I'd want to be something that's a commitment that I have to have something out, you know, every single day or that kind of thing. But I think if there's information out there that I think that would benefit people, you know, I certainly would like to get that out there as helpful information. And it doesn't matter which business it's for. I know Brian's asking about WEP. I don't know if anybody's familiar with WEP Wi-Fi Secure for home. I recommend WEP 2 or the second level of that for security. WEP is it's still more secure than having an open network, but WEP is like the first level. If you have the second level, WEP 2, which is always the better or more secure, that's the better way to lock down your network from somebody kind of accessing or hacking in or even just stealing bandwidth from you. So,
can you explain what the WEP means then? Because you're saying web, but for people that might watch later, so they can get the name of it.
You know what? I'm drawing a blank on the exact. Brian, help me out here, because honestly, I've just always gone by the letters and I never paid much attention to it. So it's like it's escaping me what the actual term is. It's, you know, it's one of those things that you take for granted and you never think twice about. So, yeah, I see he's talking about WGA also. Yeah, but most people don't have that available on the average home router, Brian. I think you'd agree with that too. So, yeah, wireless encryption. There you go. Yeah. Anyway, if there's something else that I missed tonight, anybody can always message me and ask, and I'm certainly willing to try to help with stuff. Um,
You also
but
have a Facebook page?
on my Facebook page, of course, yeah, that's probably the easiest. Actually, even if they just type my name in a Google search, I'll probably come up because I've been out between real estate and my other businesses. I'm all over the internet. So, but yeah, I'd say the Facebook page is probably easiest. I have which I haven't done a lot on it yet. I do have a Facebook page called Surplus Wholesale Supply. That's actually my reselling business. Or PowerPC, which PowerPC is typed as one word, and then systems separately. So it's PowerPC Systems, or they can just type my personal name and get to me that way too. So um, I'm trying to read what Sherry's writing here or reading too.
She's talking about the drop shipping still. She said you would also need large volume because failure to fulfill order and or mail on time will count against you. And eBay just made those part-timer or perimeters tighter last year.
Okay. And that's good to know. The thing is, that's why I'm not necessarily recommending it. I'm just saying it could be done in the right application. And keep in mind, a lot of what I've talked about tonight is having the so-called stars aligned or whatever, having everything in the right application and the right setup. You have to have, I think most people would know this who are in business, that you have to have your business structured. And what's good, what works for me may not work for somebody else. Myself, would I take a chance on drop shipping from through eBay? Well, I have, as an example, I've got two suppliers, key suppliers that I used to use all the time, that they have, I don't know if it was 50,000 or bigger in their small warehouse. Another one was almost 200,000 square feet in another warehouse, that they stock product alone. So if I was selling stock product, I think I would be less afraid to do that, because I know I could rely on them. Anytime I've shipped something out, it's been 2 to 3 days and it's been here. And so that would be, I think, kind of how I think Cherry would understand the exception to the rule is if you have that, as I mentioned, working relationship, you have somebody that has the product. If you can't afford or don't want to stock product, that's one way of doing it. If you have a very solid relationship and a history, one way to test the waters or get started in that is to do a personal website, do a business website, if it's Joe's Marketplace, whatever you want to call it, and again, having a website, you need to have the search engine optimization to get it out there and make sure it's found and all that, and do the pushing of it. And with social media now, it's actually made it a lot easier to do, and start generating some sales through there. And then that is a way of establishing relationships through vendors. That's kind of how you can test the waters a little bit and see if that'll work for you. I don't think that platform is necessarily the best or first place to start with something, though. It's just one more add-on media of sales, I guess, is what I'm kind of getting at. So, if that helps you out at all. And what other questions do you have, Chris?
Let me think. Some of you already could. Okay, what computer parts would you say are in high demand, regardless of price?
Typically, power supplies are, we've talked about those before, but those are probably one common item that tend to go out. And RAM, those are probably the two top items. Now, the other things that people tend to desire, which could be higher demand, are cases. Believe it or not, if you can get your hands on computer systems with whether it be new or used, with a desirable case. And what I mean by that is you could look at the demand for sales by checking stats. You'd be surprised how just an enclosure could sell really well. The other thing are peripherals or accessories. You're not going to pull as much money from some parts as you are others, like the cords, okay, power cords. If you can come across a large amount in a bulk sale and then break them down into smaller lots and sell them that way, you can actually do pretty well with parts like that. Memory always seems to be, and memory is really coming down in price, but again, it comes down to the specific type of memory. If you have older systems where somebody really, like I just mentioned, that 8250, that Dell Dimension 8250, for whatever reason, as old as that system is, the RAM is through the roof because it's in high demand. I have no clue why. I really don't know. There's certain things that you just can't answer. There's no rhyme or reason. But yet, if you look at gaming RAM, depending on what it is, you know, if you got gaming machines and you come across that stuff, knowing your prices, and if you could buy it right, I mean, you could turn and make some good money on that too. But again, it's those markets are still starting, you know, they're starting to get pretty flooded. So, you know, I just think it comes down to how you acquire something. If you acquire something, you know, if you can acquire the parts right, or, you know, if you got, perfect example is somebody cleaning out of the house, they got a bunch of computers down there, want to get rid of it. They may not even want something for it. They just want to get rid of it. You know, a lot of people put ads out, want ads to find, you know, throwaway parts, working, non-working, because a lot of times people don't know what's wrong with it. If it's not working, they don't know why it's not working, and they just want to get rid of it. And then you come to find out it was something very simple. You know, it could have been a cable got disconnected. It could be, you know, power supply is bad, but everything else in it is good. You know, free is still free. I had an example. You know, there's a kid that put an ad up for Craigslist a while back, and I told this story before in the Hangouts. And I felt bad because I saw he was a college kid. He needed money, and he had this gaming system up. And I looked at the specs on it and stuff, and he had it just priced way too high. And his pictures were god awful. And that's another thing. If you don't have good pictures, they could bury you. So I talked to him over 3 weeks. I think it was. You know, it was back and forth, and I was trying to give him advice on what to do with with this system that would help him sell it. I said, talk to your friends. Maybe when your friends need whatever. No. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I'll come down and take a look at it. If I like it, maybe I'll make you an offer on it. Well, I drove down there. It was in the town south of me. It was 15 miles. And I get down there, and I look at this thing, and it looked like something that came out of Herman Munster's attic. It was loaded with cobwebs. The side panel was hanging off of it. I started it up. It was making god-awful noise. But I saw what the case was, and I saw he had a Western Digital Blue, which is a very common and desirable hard drive in there. And I knew the hard drive, I could get $50 for it alone. So I offered him $25 for it. And I think it was 20 or $25. And he tried to get me up a little bit more, and I said, no. I said, I know I drove all the way down here. I said, but it's got to be worth my time messing around with it. He said, fine. So he took it. Well, I got it back home. I blew this thing out. What was making the noise was a video card. It was a bad fan on the video card. And then he had a illuminated fan, they call it 200 millimeter, which is a really large fan on the side of the case. I took that out. I put a different video card in it. I added actually they call it a Wi-Fi, or not Wi-Fi, excuse me, a FireWire card in there. It was like $13. When I cleaned this up, it looked like brand new. I was shocked at how well this cleaned up. It literally looked like the day it came off the shelf. It had one little tiny mark on it. And I put Windows 7 on it, and I sold it for $400. You know, so again, coming back to knowing what you're looking at. And in that case, even though I knew what I was looking at, I didn't know what I was looking at, because when I cleaned it up, it surprised me. It was a gem underneath how much dirt and dust. So, you know, that's why, not to compare American pickers, but there is something to be said about the old rusty gold. If you know what you're looking at and can recognize that, you know, that's huge. You know, so it does definitely mean a lot, you know, to know what you're picking and what you're selling and things. And there's sites, you know, I'm trying to remember. Price Watch is another good one. I mentioned PC Part Picker earlier, but Price Watch is a good one that you can find not only new but used parts on there. So, you know, research some of the, you know, just do a Google search for, you know, parts and things like that, and you'd be surprised what you can have come up from there. Let's see. What, if any, specialized equipment is needed for testing and tools needed? Okay. I bought it. You know, I've heard pros and cons about these power supply testers. There are some nice features to them, because there's you know, different voltage readings and things like that they give you. But believe it or not, one of the best thing for testing out a computer that may be having a problem, if the power supply is working, is another power supply. But if you want to test the power supply that's in it, then having that meter works really well. There are CPU testers those can be quite pricey. Same thing with RAM testers. So some of the equipment can get a little bit expensive. So unless you're going to do this as a regular thing or a high volume, it may or may not be worth the effort. The other thing is if you have a couple of computers laying around that, let's say, like I mentioned the optoplexes because they're so common, they take specific types of RAM. And if you get your hands on that, you can test them by just simply putting them into another system. It's not probably the best way to do it all the time, but it's a way to tell if something's working or not. Otherwise, you just, if you're going to resell something and you're not sure if it works or not, you could potentially sell it as untested, but there's always that variable on whether, a customer is going to complain about it or not. But RAM really, I think, and as long as I've been doing this and as long as I've been dealing with computers, I can't count on one hand how many time I'm not saying I've never had a bad RAM stick, but it's been very rare. The other thing is testing a motherboard. There is no real good way to test a motherboard other than you kind of take, and this is another clue for somebody who's trying to figure out a hardware issue. And Coco, if she's still here, may want to hear this too, is not her herself if she's not capable of doing this, but somebody that might be computer savvy, is basically disconnecting everything you can to the bare minimum and then just reconnect one thing at a time until the problem redevelops. Or, and that'll kind of tell you if parts are working or not working or things like that. It's a process of elimination. So it's not always boiling down to having necessarily specific equipment. I do use a lot of USB devices. Sometimes when you're booting an old system, the USB in the BIOS won't kick on and won't recognize the USB connection because it won't fire up the socket. So that doesn't always work. But a lot of times I have a couple of different Wi-Fi USB sticks that I plug in. One of them's a higher speed and another one's a lower speed because the lower speed will work better in the older machines if the newer one won't get recognized because of the firmware that's in it. So, I mean, I don't know if that really answers the question or not. The other thing too, God, there's a whole realm of things that can go wrong, but another thing that people don't think about is cleaning their computers. Once a month, you should regularly dust out your computer. Dust is probably one of the worst things in the most popular killer of a PC, or something that will make problems happen. Even if it doesn't potentially kill a PC, it will certainly lower its performance. The other thing is there are times when you should just simply pull off the CPU fan and cooler, clean out the old paste, and put new thermal paste back on, because that does get dried out and then the heat gets higher and that can burn out a CPU, or it can cause errors or things like that to happen too. So I mean, I could talk about this stuff all night, different processes, and be talking over everybody's head. But one of the things too I want to suggest, if you want me to show you, let me show you real quick if you give me a second here.
I'm going to say a couple shout outs. We got Cherry Vintage, we got the Crazy Card, Ryan the Albatross, Dustin Sodders, Swamp Picker, Dusty, Chad,
Okay.
Dwayne, Mothership Products, Thrifty Treasures, which I want to let everybody know she's going to be my guest on Sunday night for the Sunday Night Live My Life. We got Dawn in the house. So go ahead, Joe.
All right, here's something that, if you can see this, I'll try to see it. I can't tell because there is this delay. If this is it in the camera? Can you see it, Chris? Because I
can see the box. Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, you see what it says? It says Duster.
Yep.
Okay, it actually looks like a vacuum, or it's actually marketed kind of like a vacuum, but it's really a cool device. This costs about $59 on $54 to $59 on Amazon, I think is where I got it. It's called DataVac, DATAVAC, and this is actually the product I would recommend for anybody to use to clean electronics or any other product, or anything that they want. Really, it actually is kind of like a blow dryer on steroids. It's got a ton of power. It does a great job. It's got some adapters in there that are really nice for getting into fine places. And the key to it is much like the canned air, or unlike the canned air, excuse me. The canned air can be dangerous because if you hold it wrong or everybody knows how those cans can get cold, it'll blow liquid. And liquid is obviously one of the most dangerous things for it. That's why they say don't use compressors, because a lot of people don't realize there's moisture in those compressor lines. I used to use a small compressor, but I did is I put actually a water filter system in place to kind of collect the water, but it still was a risk. And it was always forever restarting and stuff. So then when I found this, I haven't used anything else since, and this will literally blow out any computer in minutes. The one thing I'll tell you, there's been mixed signals about whether you, and Dustin, I see your question, I'll get to it in a minute, whether you hold the fans or not. I always recommend holding the fans. I use like a pipe cleaner or something like that and just stick it in the fan to keep it from spinning, because you can overspin those fans to the point of either breaking them. Some of them say they create an electrical current that can short out something on the motherboard. Same thing with your power supply. You stick it up through the vent holes and actually stop the power supply fan from spinning while you're blowing it out, and blow it in from both directions to get the dust out of it. And that'll protect the fans too. And you'll be surprised at how well this will do. It's well worth the money, and it'll pay for itself in gold. Because if you think about it, those cans are probably $6 or $7 a piece on average. And the average person probably goes through a dozen cans a year if they do true cleaning like they're supposed to do. Now, Dustin asked me if I build custom machines for other resellers. I'll build custom machines for anybody who wants one. Yeah, I have. I mean, I can build whatever level machine you need. And basically, it's like I said before, machines are built for the use. You know, if you're going to be doing a lot of video or that kind of thing, that can all, dictate. It's not just about the operating system. It's also about the processor speed. It's also about the RAM and that kind of stuff. A lot of people think with gaming, they always think, oh, I got to have the biggest, baddest processor. Well, no, you have to have a good processor, but it's the video card. And that's kind of the same thing. If you're going to be doing a lot of heavy graphics, having a good video card, most machines with an onboard graphics will work. But if you really want to have some better performance, you should put what they call a dedicated card or separate video card in there. And I think I just I'm looking at Craftsman Pancake Compressor. No, Brian, I wouldn't. It's like I mentioned before. He asked, is it safe to blow out your computer with a Craftsman Pancake Compressor? Like I said, I used to use a compressor before. I actually had a smaller, like I said, smaller one. But unless you have a filtration system on there to trap, or a dryer to try to dry the water, it's always risky doing that. So anyway. And then let's see, Joe, do you use a static wrap when digging into a computer? Believe it or not always. Matter of fact, a lot of times I don't. But the key is where you're working on it. I have carpet in my office here, and I have worked on it in here. But one of the things you need to do is just constantly be grounding yourself out. Is put your, touch the case or touch something metal to just keep yourself grounded all the time. And that's basically what that strap does. The only thing I found with the strap is it tends to get in the way. So I'm not saying don't use it. I have one, but I quite regularly don't because I know enough to always be touching the case or to ground myself to keep the electric shocks down. And I, to this day, knock on wood, I haven't, shorted out a board or hurt anything that way. So does anybody else have any other questions?
I actually have one more question, and then we'll get ready to shut down and do an after show hangout for a little bit, if Google will let us. Have you sold monitors and stuff like that? And how did you ship them if you did?
Yes, I do. I've sold monitors, keyboards, mice, anything. And typically the monitors, it's like anything else, it's a little common sense. It's just making sure you have enough padding. Bubble wrap isn't the cure-all. It's really good. But one of the things that I recommend to anybody, it's just like the computer I sent out last night, is having, if you ever notice, if you've ever bought a desktop and how they come packaged, they don't have all the padding necessarily directly against the machine. It's suspended within this foam, usually a harder foam or something like that. Now, if you don't have that and you have bubble wrap, that's fine. But what I recommend then is the box within a box. It can be a little bit, you got to plan for that in your expenses too. But when you double box something and you give it that little bit of extra cushion room, it eliminates that crush factor. And it's the same thing with the monitors. Now, bubble wrapping monitors, I would always recommend using a heavier bubble wrap. The thicker, like the 1/2 inch or 5/16, preferably 1/2 inch, because in a case like that, it's going to give you that little bit more cushion. You don't have to go super thick with it if you get a good layer around it. But then again, it's getting it in where it also isn't going to be moving around. You want to make sure it's stationary in whatever you put it in, and not that it's going to be flopping around. And typically, you'll have better luck. The other option is you can also go to some of the shipping suppliers, and they actually have boxes you could buy, but they're a bit pricey. It's easier to get bulk and laptop boxes if you're ever shipping a laptop. But quite honestly, those are easy to ship anyway without buying those. The desktop ones are a little bit harder to come by because, again, most manufacturers, what I do when I'm building a new machine, I use the box that the case comes in, and that usually works really well. The only difference is the weight changes because obviously now it's got components in it. And even that, there's cases where double boxing them could be pretty important to do. It's not always necessary, but it's, you got to kind of use a little bit of common sense with that. So I hope everybody feels like they've got something on this. I am a talker, but, I have no problem talking on a public venue, but it's a little different when you're just talking to a screen. I'm trying to pay attention to a few things. And now I really got the gist on how hard this can be for the YouTubers when you're trying to pay attention to the chat and all the other things. But, again, anybody can reach out to me at any time. I'm always willing to try to help any way I can with this stuff. So any other questions, whatever you want to do? Oh, I do see one in here. Brian says, is there still a market for CRT monitors? Absolutely not. Matter of fact, getting rid of those, you need to get rid of those in such a fashion. There's certain recyclers that will take them. Believe it or not, not every Goodwill does, but there are Goodwills that will take them because there's a certain recycle program they're on. They have to be gotten rid of in a certain way because they have some of the nastiest things in there that are so dangerous. So that is something that I will tell people. If you have a big, the old bulky CRT monitors, make sure you take them to a proper recycle center, or wait for, a lot of times different communities will have a recycle day where they'll collect all this stuff. Because that has to be disposed of in a very certain way. So.
Yeah, see, Mr. Sadie just showed up right when we're about to end.
How you doing, Sadie? Good to see you.
Well, since he's a hockey fan, I guess he can get away with missing one episode.
Yeah.
Plus, we would.
The only embarrassing thing I did tonight was not being able to answer WEP. It's like I had this. I honestly, I just got this mental block. It's like all of a sudden it would poof, And of course, it comes at the most inopportune time. But I knew I had Brian. He had my back, right?
Yeah, at least Brian was in the comments tonight.
Yeah. So. Well, thanks for having me on. I know you've been wanting me to come on for a while. I always worried whether I'd be a worthy guest or not for what I could offer here. I hope I was informative to people, and I know it was about reselling, and I hope we covered both of that, even though we kind of got, it always goes that way, you kind of get a little bit off the beaten path, but that's par because everything is related in some fashion or another, I guess, to some extent. And if one other thing, being that I am such a Linux fan, I saw Brian put it in there earlier too about distrowatch.com. If you want to ever learn a little bit about Linux, if you're leery about it, there's plenty of YouTube videos out there, Spatry and Charlie Hinson, and I mean Toss. This guy goes Toss. There's a lot of people that talk about this stuff, and they still compare it to Windows sometimes and Mac and that kind of thing, but it's very informative stuff. And then if you want to play around with these distributions, it's really easy compared to what it was a decade ago. And you might be surprised. You might just like it. And the only thing I'll tell you right now where it's lagging a little bit is maybe from Dymo printers or stuff like that. There's a few devices right now, but a lot of these companies are starting to come on board with supporting it because they are realizing there's a market that for it, and it can actually serve people. Let me see. I see Swamp has a question in there.
Yeah, I was trying to read it to see if I can understand it.
I'm not sure what you mean, Swamp.
I think about the CRT monitors. I don't know what the NCS means.
Oh, NCSI has. Oh, I got it. Okay. I assume is he talking about the program, or is he talking about the actual agency? So, yeah, TV show. Okay. Yeah, it's funny when you see it. I pick up on that too. You see a lot of those old time monitors in some of these programs, and you got to laugh. It looks in today's world of a modern program, they got a brand new, card or racing around, and whether it's a Dodge Charger or whatever, and they got these CRTs sitting on their desk. I got to laugh about that. I get it. Yeah, it's funny. Brian says, do you have to compile anything anymore in Linux? You can grab and run in gun version. Well, Brian, you know that, well, with Linux, you don't really, the average user who's going to use a distro, no, there's really no compiling that they would have to do unless you want to mess with it. Usually compiling is done from people who want to tinker like under the hood, so to speak. That's the beauty of Linux too. If you have some kind of capability of getting into dabbling with the coding and stuff like that, anybody could create their own distribution. They could take the basic distribution of either Manjaro or Ubuntu or one of those, and you could literally create your own if you have some sense of coding and that kind of stuff. And there's actually a lot of available information out there. But compiling, it's not like before years ago when you actually had to put different components together on a disk in order to load it on your computer. Well, now it's just a matter of downloading what they call an ISO or a torrent file and plugging it in your computer and booting from that, and boom, and you go. So, all right. Anything else, Chris?
No, I was trying to mute myself because the cat was meowing, and then I got a train horn going off in the background.
Oh, I didn't even hear it. I don't hear anything. So,
Well, I want to thank everybody for watching tonight. Like I said, Sunday night at our normal 7 o'clock time is we're gonna have I got Tanya at 50 Treasures on doing the My Life series. So come watch her and learn about her history. And I hope we gave you good information. I know we didn't cover a lot of the selling part of it, but I know Joe had a lot of knowledge and he's willing to share it if you come to him. So thanks, Joe, for coming on. I know you were a little hesitant at first and worried about it. I know you have enough knowledge. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And with that being said, I will be sending doing the link for the after show in the chat, since I know a couple people may not get in the group. So I'm gonna be a little nicer this week and put it in the group and in the chat here. Hopefully Google will let us all hang out for a while. Thanks again, everybody.
Good night.